I'm Nora Bennett, 36, and at 3:17 a.m., the first sound in my new life isn't celebration. It's a slow, stubborn drip somewhere above my bed. The room still smells like fresh paint, the kind that promises clean starts, but a darker circle is spreading across the ceiling like a bruise I can't ignore. A second drip joins the first, then a third, and my grandmother's quilt gathers each drop with quiet patience. When the thunder rolls, it rattles the windows, and something in me I thought was unshakable. By the time I reach for the lamp, I know the thing I've worked 10 years to build may not be the safe place I imagined. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and if you've ever had to stand your ground when family pushed too hard, tap like and subscribe, so more folks can hear stories like this. I grew up in a small Ohio town where Saturdays meant yard work and Sundays meant pot roast, and where my parents taught me the basics that felt like bedrock. Keep your word, pay your bills on time, help when you can, and don't make a scene you don't have to make. I wasn't the loud one or the star. That was Evan, my older brother, the one who always seemed to find the spotlight and look natural under it. Numbers made sense to me, though, and I built a life around them. Steady hours, careful plans, lunches packed from home, and a savings account that rose grain by grain until it could finally carry the weight of a front door key. In my family, responsibility had a certain sound, the scrape of a shovel, the creak of a screen door. But in the city where I settled for work, responsibility looked like spreadsheets, late nights at quarter end, and choosing used furniture over new, because the math worked out better. When the housing market heated up, the distance between how I was raised and where I lived grew in ways I didn't expect. Evan's world was open houses and glossy brochures, tidy kitchens staged with bowls of lemons and phrases like, act fast and won't last the weekend. Mine was debt-to-income ratios, interest rates, and the slow satisfaction of not spending a dollar I didn't have. Still, I wanted a place that would quiet the noise of home where the air felt like mine. Evan said he'd help, and Mom said it was past time. I told myself family is where you start when you're ready for something big, and I nodded along when they said the word steal with a smile that didn't quite reach my father's eyes. Evan handled the calls and the paperwork because that was his lane, and I stayed in mine signing where I was told and trusting the process everyone else seemed to know by heart. Mom set a bouquet on the counter the day I closed a bright thing in a bright room, and Dad gave me a quiet hug the way he does when words feel fragile. I walked each room slowly, mentally measuring where a bookshelf might sit and which window would catch morning light, and told myself the strange echo would fade once the boxes were gone. It felt like a threshold you step over, once the moment when a long plan becomes a daily life and an address becomes a home. I slept that first week with the doors locked, the thermostat steady, and the hum of the fridge sounding like a promise. The storm that wakes me now doesn't announce itself with sirens or high winds, just a determined rain that tests seams and edges, and it's the kind of test you don't know you're taking until you've already failed. I move through the dark gathering bowls and baking pans, telling myself, this is what houses do sometimes, that tomorrow there will be a simple fix and a trip to the hardware store. A line of water creeps along the crown molding in the hallway, and the air turns damp in a way I can feel in my breath. By the time I reach the basement door, the wood is cool under my palm, and the stairwell smells like wet concrete. I pause there with my hand on the railing, listening to the steady tap below, and understand that what waits for me at the bottom will change more than my plans for the week. Water gathered at my feet by the time I reached the basement floor. It spread slowly, curling around the legs of the water heater before swallowing the last dry patch of concrete. The overhead light buzzed weakly, throwing reflections across the puddles that glimmered like warning signs. I stood there long enough for the chill to sink through my socks and into my bones. The railing Evan swore would last a lifetime was slick beneath my palm, and the air carried the sour scent of damp plaster. I didn't move until I heard another sharp drip somewhere behind me, as steady as a clock ticking down to something I didn't yet understand. When morning came, the rain hadn't stopped. Buckets and mixing bowls dotted every room, collecting leaks that played an uneven rhythm against metal and glass. My grandmother's quilt hung heavy on a chair, its faded roses darkened by water. I made coffee I couldn't drink and sat at the kitchen table surrounded by paperwork, closing documents, inspection reports, repair certificates, all prepared by my brother. The pages looked official, stamped and signed, but the company names were unfamiliar. The roof certification claimed 15 years of life left, and the foundation assessment declared it solid. Both reports were dated just 2 months before I bought the house. Something about them didn't feel right. I pulled out my laptop and typed in the first company listed on the certificate. No results. The second brought up an expired business license dissolved 3 years ago. I tried the third, hoping I'd made a mistake, but the address led to a vacant lot on Google Street View. I sat there for a long time, the rain hammering against the windows, thinking about how many times I'd told myself family was the safest place to trust. Then I picked up my phone and called Evan. He didn't answer. I called again. Still nothing. When I finally texted Mom, she replied within minutes asking what all the fuss was about. 10 minutes later, Evan's name flashed on my screen. "Hey, sis," he said, his voice light, almost cheerful. "Mom said you're worried about a leak. Old houses do that. It's normal. The roof is caving in, Evan. The basement's flooding. Don't panic," he said with a laugh that didn't sound real. "Every house needs maintenance. I'll come by tomorrow with my caulk gun. You'll see." "It's not a crack in the paint," I said, but he'd already started talking over me, promising he'd take care of it. The calm in his tone was worse than anger. It was the same voice he used to close Sale's smooth practiced final. I told him I was changing the locks. There was silence, then a sharp exhale. "Why would you do that?" he asked. I hung up before I answered. The next call came from Mom. "How could you treat your brother this way after everything he did for you?" she demanded. "You should be grateful you even have a house." When I told her the truth, the silence that followed was heavy, like she was choosing which side to stand on, and I already knew it wouldn't be mine. "You're exaggerating," she said finally. "Don't make this worse than it is." By mid-morning, I stopped trying to reason with them and called Paige instead. She arrived an hour later, hair pulled into a messy bun holding 2 cups of coffee, and a man in work boots I'd never met. "This is Mark," she said. "He's a contractor friend. Thought you could use another set of eyes." Mark's boots made wet prints across the floor as I led them through the house. He didn't say much, just made small noises, low whistles, quiet hums, as he studied each stain and crack. When we reached the basement, he crouched near the foundation, scraping at a patch with his pocket knife. The concrete crumbled away like sand. Behind it, a crack ran the length of the wall, dark and deep. "I've seen flips like this before," he said, standing slowly. "They covered it up just enough to get through an inspection. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were hiding." Paige looked at me, eyes soft but steady. "Your family handled the sale, right?" I nodded. The words caught in my throat. Evan was the agent. He brought the inspector. Mark leaned against the stair railing, arms crossed. "Then you need proof. Real proof. Pictures, reports, everything." The word proof echoed in my mind as I followed him upstairs. The kitchen felt smaller now, crowded with damp papers, and a truth I couldn't yet face. Mark sifted through the stack of inspection forms, shaking his head as he compared signatures. "These names don't match, and this license number, it belongs to someone else." He scrolled through his phone, then looked up. "The man listed here died 3 years ago." My stomach dropped. "That's not possible." "They probably copied a real license number," he said quietly. "Happens more than you'd think." He gathered the papers into a neat pile. "You're going to need an attorney." Paige put her hand on my shoulder. "We'll figure it out. But you can't let them dismiss this." Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the gutters overflowed like the house was still trying to cry. I stood at the window watching it all and thought about the photo from closing day, the one where Mom held the keys, and Evan smiled like a man who'd just won something. I'd believed every word they said about how proud they were, how I'd finally made it. Now the edges of that moment felt sharp enough to cut. I turned back to the table where the ink on the documents had started to bleed from the damp air. My trust had been paper thin, and the truth was already seeping through it. Later that afternoon, Mark printed an itemized list of structural problems, each line more severe than the last. The cost estimate sat at the bottom, bold and impossible to ignore, over $100,000 in repairs. I stared at the number until it blurred. My savings were gone, and now the house itself was sinking with me. Paige reached across the table, steadying my hand, before I realized it was shaking. "You're not alone in this," she said quietly. The next morning, I woke to sunlight instead of rain. The stillness felt wrong, too clean after the chaos. I made a list inspectors to call agencies to contact, but stopped at the first step. I didn't even know where to start. My phone buzzed with a new message from Evan. "Mom's upset. You're blowing this out of proportion. We're already in debt from trying to fix that place for you." Another text followed. "You should be thanking us, not accusing us." I stared at the words, wondering how gratitude could coexist with betrayal. At 9 o'clock, Paige pulled into my driveway again, this time alone. "You ready?" she asked, holding her keys. "I called a real estate attorney. He can see you this afternoon." Her voice left no room for argument. I grabbed the folder of evidence, each page now sealed in plastic sleeves, and followed her to the car. As we backed out, Mrs. Pruitt from next door waved from her porch the way neighbors do when they're not sure if it's safe to ask questions. "Your brother said you got a great deal," she called. "Said he was proud to help you." I paused long enough to meet her eyes. "Would you be willing to tell that to an attorney?" She blinked, then nodded slowly. The air outside smelled like wet soil and something else, resolution. The farther we drove, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about a broken roof or a flooded basement. Something deliberate had happened here, and the people who should have protected me were the ones who lit the fuse. I looked down at the folder in my lap, the documents that would tell the story better than I ever could. Paige glanced over and asked softly, "What are you thinking?" I answered without looking up. "That it's time to find out exactly what they did." The drive to the attorney's office passed in silence, except for the wipers brushing away leftover rain. I kept the folder of documents on my lap, my fingers pressed against the plastic sleeves to stop them from shaking. The closer we got, the heavier everything felt, like every page carried the weight of a lie. Paige parked in front of a brick building with a sign that read, "Hale and Morton Attorneys at Law." She turned to me before opening her door. "You've got the truth on your side," she said softly. I nodded, though the words didn't feel real yet. Inside, the office smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. A woman at the front desk ushered us into a conference room where shelves of legal books lined the walls. Arthur Hale entered a few minutes later, a tall man with calm eyes and a voice that didn't rise or rush. He listened as I explained what happened, the flooding, the falsified reports, the company names that led nowhere. He didn't interrupt, just made notes in a small leather pad. When I finished, he asked for the folder. As he flipped through the pages, his brows furrowed slightly. "These documents," he said, tapping one, "are all printed from the same template. Different headers, same formatting. That's not typical." He spread the paperwork across the table, comparing signatures side by side. "You see here, the same handwriting appears on multiple certifications. That's a serious red flag." I felt my throat tighten. "Can we prove they knew?" He looked up at me. "If we find the original records or confirm these businesses don't exist, yes, it's more than negligence, it's fraud." His tone remained even, but the word carried its own gravity. Fraud. A word that changed everything. When we left the office, the sun had broken through the clouds for the first time in days. Paige started the car, then looked at me. "You okay?" I wasn't sure how to answer. The truth sat somewhere between anger and disbelief, a place where words didn't quite fit. As we drove, my phone buzzed with another message from Mom. "You're making a scene, Nora. Family doesn't take family to lawyers." I turned the screen face down on my lap. That night, I tried to sleep in the guest room where the ceiling hadn't yet started to leak. Every sound felt sharper, the ticking clock, the creak of wood settling. I thought about every sacrifice that led to this house, skipped vacations, hand-me-down furniture, extra hours at work. 10 years of saving turned into a roof that couldn't keep out rain. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of water again, creeping through the walls like something alive. The next morning, I woke with a plan. I needed to know how deep the deception went. Paige met me for coffee, and together we called the county records office. The clerk confirmed what Mark had suspected. Evan's company, Bennett Property Group, had purchased my house 8 months before I did. He'd filed renovation permits for cosmetic updates, only paint, flooring, new fixtures, no foundation or roof work listed. "So they flipped it," Paige murmured. and they couldn't sell it until they found someone who trusted them. The words sat between us like a truth we both wished weren't real. By the end of the call, my suspicion hardened into certainty. Evan hadn't just taken advantage of a stranger, he'd used me to bail out a bad investment. That evening I called Dad. His voice sounded tired, careful. "Your mother says you're upset about the house," he began. "It's more than that," I told him. "Evan sold me a property with known defects. I have proof." There was a long pause before he answered. I didn't know it was that serious. His hesitation told me otherwise. "Can we meet tomorrow?" he asked quietly. "Talk this through," I agreed, though I already knew talk wouldn't change what had been done. The next morning, as I packed documents for the meeting, Paige called. "Before you meet your dad, there's someone you need to talk to," she said. "The previous owner." Mark tracked him down. An hour later, I stood on the porch of a tidy blue craftsman home, clutching my folder like a shield. Walter Green opened the door, a silver-haired man in wire-rimmed glasses, who looked surprised to see me. "You must be Nora," he said, ushering me inside. "Your brother told me not to discuss the property with anyone. I assume this is about that." We sat in his living room where the shelves were lined with model airplanes and family photos. He disappeared into a back room and returned with a thick folder. I kept everything he said, handing it over. Force of habit from 40 years in engineering. Inside were insurance letters, inspection notes, and repair estimates. "When your brother made his offer, I told him about the foundation cracks and roof damage," he said. "I even showed him the insurance denial they wouldn't renew coverage because of structural issues." He pointed to the highlighted section in one-letter evidence of repeated water intrusion through foundation and roof. I scanned the page, my stomach twisting. He knew I asked. "Of course," Walter replied. "He said he had connections who could handle the repairs cheaply. I assumed he would fix everything before selling." He paused, studying my face. "I'm sorry, Miss Bennett. I truly thought you understood what you were buying." I took photos of the documents, my hands trembling with every click. When I reached the back of the folder, an email caught my eye. It was from my brother's college friend, Jeff Klein, the same name on my inspection report. Walter frowned when I asked about him. "Your brother said Jeff would provide an updated report once the work was done. Guess that never happened." The last of my doubt fell away. Every thread led back to Evan. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of rain again. I sat in my car, staring at the folder in my lap, and realized I wasn't just holding evidence, I was holding the truth my family had buried. When I called Arthur Hale, he answered on the first ring. "We've got what we need," I told him. The previous owner confirmed everything. Evan had full knowledge of the damage. Arthur's tone shifted from measured to resolute. "Then it's time to act. This isn't just a civil issue anymore. We're moving into criminal territory." By the time I got home, the first drops of rain were tapping against the windows again, soft but insistent. I pulled a chair to the kitchen table, spreading the documents out under the light. Insurance denials, fake inspections, expired licenses, each one a piece of the puzzle. For the first time since that stormy night, the fear that had followed me began to fade, replaced by something steadier. Paige called to check in. "How did it go with Mr. Green?" she asked. "I have everything I said. Evan used his friend as the inspector. The house wasn't insurable. They all knew." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Then it's time to stop reacting," she said quietly. "It's time to respond." I stayed up late that night, organizing the evidence into labeled folders, roof foundation, electrical correspondence. Each file represented another piece of the life I thought I'd built on trust. When I finally turned off the lamp, I sat for a while in the half-dark, listening to the steady hum of the refrigerator and the soft drip of rain outside. The fear had changed shape. It wasn't about losing the house anymore. It was about facing the people who had built their security on my downfall. I gathered the folders, stacked them neatly, and whispered into the quiet, "Now we do this on my terms." The next morning, I sent a single message to my parents. "Coffee at the Maplewood Diner, 10 a.m. We need to talk." Then I set the phone down, folded the last document into place, and watched the rain slide down the window, waiting for what came next. The diner smelled like coffee and maple syrup, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes long after you left. I arrived early, choosing a corner booth with a clear view of the parking lot. The folder of evidence sat in front of me, its edges squared neatly, the pages inside organized in the order Arthur had advised. My hands stayed folded on top of it as I watched the clock edge toward 10. One by one, they arrived Dad first, his shoulders slightly hunched like he already knew what was coming. Mom followed, crisp and composed, sunglasses still on indoors. Evan came last, his phone in hand, pretending calm. When they sat down, the booth felt smaller than it had a moment ago. Mom spoke first. "This better be important, Nora. We have a showing at 11. I slid the insurance letter across the table without answering. "From the previous owner," I said. "He told me he disclosed the foundation and roof damage before the sale." Evan's eyes darted across the page before his face lost color. He tried for a smile that didn't hold. "That's old information," he said quickly. Everything was repaired before closing. I opened the next document, an email from him to Jeff Klein requesting a clean report. I didn't have to say anything. The proof did the talking. Mom's hand tightened around her coffee cup. "We were just trying to help you, sweetheart. Property values are up. It was a good opportunity." I looked directly at her. "You sold me a house you couldn't unload on anyone else." Dad stayed silent, his eyes moving from one face to the next, like he was seeing all of us clearly for the first time. Evan leaned forward, his voice dropping low. "Look, maybe some paperwork got mixed up, but we can fix this privately. No need to bring lawyers into it." I closed the folder. "That time has passed," I said quietly. "Arthur Hale will contact you this afternoon." The name landed like a stone in the middle of the table. Evan's jaw tightened. Mom started to protest, but I stood before she could. "You did this to me," I said. "Not strangers. Me." Dad followed me outside a few minutes later. The sun was sharp against the windshield as we stood beside his car. "I didn't know how bad it was," he said, voice low. "I thought they were helping you." I believed him. The disappointment in his eyes matched the exhaustion in mine. "I need to see it," he said. "The house." I nodded and we drove there together in silence. The air inside still smelled faintly of damp plaster. He walked through the rooms, slowly touching walls, tracing cracks with the tips of his fingers. When he reached the basement, he stopped. Water stains spread like maps across the foundation, dark lines weaving into one another. He didn't say a word for a long time. When he finally looked at me, his face had gone pale. "Your mother and Evan, they hid this." I nodded. They both knew. He pressed a hand against the wall, then let it fall to his side. "I'm sorry, Nora," he said softly. "I should have asked more questions." That night after he left, I stood at the same kitchen window where I'd watched the first storm roll in. The house was quiet now, but the silence didn't feel empty anymore. I could hear my own resolve in it, steady, deliberate. The next morning, Dad called Arthur to offer a statement. He'd found notes Evan had left in their home office, scribbled estimates from contractors detailing foundation and roof repairs, totaling over $70,000. He knew exactly what he was selling, Arthur said when I brought him the files. "This proves intent." For the next few days, Arthur and I worked side by side at his office building the framework of the case. Each document became a piece of the story, falsified inspections, expired, licenses, old emails. Paige stopped by with coffee and helped sort photographs into labeled envelopes. We were meticulous, slow, and certain. Every page I filed chipped away at the disbelief that had followed me since that first night of dripping water. The more I learned, the less room there was for doubt. Mom called once during that week, her voice brittle. "You're tearing this family apart," she said. I almost told her it wasn't me, but the words didn't seem necessary anymore. The truth didn't need defending. After that, she stopped calling altogether. I focused on the facts: dates, signatures, repair estimates, inspection laws. The numbers steadied me. I'd spent a lifetime relying on them, and now they were the bridge between betrayal and justice. By the end of the week, Arthur had everything ready for filing. "We're in a strong position," he said, sliding the thick folder across his desk. "The evidence is clean and organized. They won't be able to talk their way around it. I traced my fingers over the label on the front, Bennett v. Bennett Property Group. The name looked strange, like something pulled from another life. When we file, he continued, the commission will likely open an investigation into your brother's license. Are you prepared for that? I nodded, though the answer didn't come easily. Family had once meant safety. Now it meant courtrooms and affidavits. That evening, I sat on the porch steps with a cup of tea watching the sun dip behind the trees. The air smelled of wet soil clean after days of rain. Dad called to tell me he'd met with Arthur and signed his statement. I'm proud of you, he said quietly, for standing up even when it's hard. His voice caught at the end, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The quiet between us felt like something repaired, fragile, but holding. Paige stopped by later with dinner in a paper bag. She spread the containers across my kitchen counter, laughing softly at the sight of the taped-up ceiling patches. You're getting there, she said. I smiled, realizing it was the first time I'd done so in weeks. We ate in silence for a while, the steady hum of the refrigerator filling the space. What happens next? She asked. We wait, I said. Arthur files Monday morning. The words felt final, a line drawn where hesitation used to be. Before she left, she paused at the doorway. You know, Nora, she said this isn't just about fixing what they did. It's about proving you can. I watched her walk to her car under the porch light, the glow catching on the wet pavement. Inside, I gathered the files one last time, checking every page. The folder closed with a sound that felt like the end of something heavy. I placed it on the table, took a slow breath, and let the quiet settle again. Somewhere outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, faint but steady. Another storm was coming, but this time I wasn't bracing for it. I was ready. The weekend passed quietly, though nothing about it felt restful. I kept busy sorting receipts, checking the locks twice, cleaning rooms that would soon be photographed for evidence. By Monday morning, the weight of what I had to do settled in like heavy air before a storm. Arthur filed the paperwork just after 9. He called to confirm, his voice calm and steady. It's official now, he said. I thanked him, though the word felt small for something that large. For the first time in weeks, I drove to work. My desk looked the same folders, same coffee mug, but I could feel a distance between who I'd been before and who I was now. My phone buzzed just after lunch. A new message from Evan. We need to talk. Don't make this worse. I let it sit unread until evening. When I got home, I found an envelope wedged in the doorframe, my name written in his handwriting. Inside was a note and a single sheet of paper, his version of a settlement offer. The numbers were insultingly low. Beneath them, he'd written, "Families shouldn't destroy each other over money." I folded it once and placed it in a drawer. The next morning, Arthur called again. Be ready for pushback, he warned. When someone loses control, they often double down. His words proved true faster than either of us expected. Within 24 hours, Mom began calling relatives saying I was attacking my own brother over a misunderstanding. My cousin texted to ask why I was suing family. I didn't respond. That afternoon, Paige showed up with groceries and an exhausted look. They're spreading rumors already, she said. But it won't last. People will see the truth when it comes out. Later that week, Dad stopped by after work. He brought coffee and an envelope of old papers he'd found in the home office. I think these belong with your file, he said. Inside were handwritten notes and Evan's script estimates from contractors, timelines for minor concealment repairs, and lists of costs. Arthur called them smoking guns. I called them what they were, proof that every bit of this had been intentional. That evening, Dad and I sat in the living room surrounded by boxes of documents. He looked older in the soft lamplight, his hands clasped loosely on his knees. Your mother refuses to believe any of this, he said quietly. She thinks you'll drop the case once you cool down. I didn't answer right away. The clock ticked between us, the only sound in the room. She's afraid of what this will do to our name, he added. But I'm more afraid of what it'll do to you if you don't see it through. Arthur scheduled a strategy meeting for Friday afternoon. His office felt different this time, not intimidating, but focused. He'd arranged everything neatly across the long table: inspection reports, emails, photos, contractor statements. We'll file an ethics complaint with the Real Estate Commission alongside the civil suit. he said, tapping a document. "The goal isn't revenge, it's accountability." Paige sat beside me, flipping through the pages with careful hands. When she reached the repair estimates, she exhaled slowly. "This is solid," she said. "He can't spin this." As we worked, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Evan. "You're making a mistake. Mom's crying every night. Stop before this goes public." Arthur saw the tension in my face. "You don't need to respond," he said. "Everything you say can be twisted." I turned the phone face down and went back to organizing the documents. That weekend, the silence between me and Mom became its own kind of noise. She sent one final message, a voicemail filled with shaky words about forgiveness and loyalty, ending with, "You're still my daughter, but I don't know who you've become." I listened once, then deleted it. The truth had divided us in a way no apology could mend, not yet. Paige stayed with me that night. We ate takeout at the kitchen table, the same one that once held the leaking bowls and ruined paperwork. The sound of rain started again outside, faint but steady. She leaned back in her chair, watching me. "You've changed," she said quietly. "In a good way." I looked toward the window where the reflection of my house shimmered faintly against the glass. "I had to," I said. By Monday, Arthur confirmed that the Real Estate Commission had received our filing. Evan's license would be under review pending investigation. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. Evan called Dad first, furious, demanding to know why he'd betrayed the family. Then he called me, leaving a message that swung between anger and pleading. "You can't undo this once it starts," he said. "You'll regret it." I didn't call back. 2 days later, Arthur forwarded me an email from Evan's attorney proposing mediation. I read it twice and shook my head. "They want to settle quietly," Arthur explained. "But the offer comes with confidentiality. You'd have to withdraw the commission complaint." I thought about the flooded basement, the forged reports, and the way my mother's voice had sounded when she chose sides. "No," I said. "We don't settle." The days that followed moved in slow motion. The casework consumed my evenings. I went to work, came home, reviewed files, and slept in short, dreamless stretches. Through it all, Paige kept showing up with food, with quiet conversation, with reminders that I wasn't alone. Dad called every few nights, his voice steadier each time. "Whatever happens," he told me once, "I'll testify if you need me." I thanked him, the words catching in my throat. Late one night, while I was reviewing a stack of emails, I found one I hadn't noticed before. An exchange between Evan and Jeff Klein dated 2 weeks before my purchase. "Need inspection report finalized, ASAP. Use same format as last one change, name and date." Jeff had replied, "On it. Consider it done." I printed it, the sound of the paper feeding through the machine oddly satisfying. It wasn't anger I felt then, or even sadness. It was clarity. By the end of that week, Arthur had the final version of our case binder ready for court. He placed it on the table, its cover marked with the words, "Bennett vs. Bennett Property Group." I traced my finger along the edge of the folder, the paper cool and sharp under my skin. "Once we file this," Arthur said, "everything becomes public record. There's no going back." I met his eyes and nodded. "Then let's finish what they started." That night after Arthur left, I walked through the house one last time before heading to bed. The rain had stopped, but the smell of damp wood lingered in the air. In the hallway, a single droplet slipped from the ceiling and landed on the floor, darkening the wood. I watched it spread, small and silent. Then I went to fetch a cloth, not in panic this time, but in certainty. Outside, the clouds began to thin, letting in faint silver light. I stood by the window, watching it spill across the floorboards, and realized something simple and final. I wasn't the one hiding from storms anymore. I was the one walking straight through them. The court date hadn't been set yet, but I knew what waited next. The truth was coming into full view, and soon so would justice. The court date arrived faster than I expected, though. Every day, leading up to it, felt like a slow march. The night before, I barely slept. I laid out my clothes, a navy blazer, pressed slacks, and the folder of documents I'd spent months gathering. The early morning light felt heavy as I drove to Arthur's office. Paige was already there, leaning against the hood of her car with 2 coffees in hand. "One for courage," she said, handing me a cup. I managed a quiet thank you, though my hands trembled slightly as I took it. Inside the courthouse, everything looked too clean, too polished. The hum of voices, the shuffle of shoes, and the echo of doors opening and closing all blended into one steady rhythm. Arthur met us near the elevators, calm as ever, his briefcase clasped in one hand. "We're prepared," he said. "All we do today is tell the truth." His voice steadied me more than the caffeine ever could. When we entered the courtroom, my heart pounded hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. Evan sat at the opposite table, his suit crisp, his smile faint but forced. Mom sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the judge's bench. Dad was in the second row behind me, his expression unreadable. For a brief second, I thought of the day I bought the house, the photo of us all smiling on the porch, and felt the sharp contrast of that memory against the airless quiet of this room. The proceedings began with opening statements. Evan's attorney spoke first, his tone polished and practiced. "This case," he began, "is a painful misunderstanding between family members. My client helped his sister purchase a home at a fair price. Any issues with the property arose afterward, as can happen with any older house." I sat still, my fingers locked together under the table. When he gestured toward me, describing me as an inexperienced buyer, overwhelmed by maintenance challenges, I felt my pulse rise but said nothing. Then it was Arthur's turn. He stood slowly, buttoned his jacket, and faced the judge. "Your Honor, this isn't about a misunderstanding. It's about deliberate deceit. We intend to show that Mr. Bennett sold his sister a property he knew to be structurally unsafe and covered that fact with falsified inspection reports." His voice carried calm authority, each word steady and deliberate. He began presenting evidence, the original inspection reports side by side with the fraudulent ones. The differences were obvious even to an untrained eye. The forged signatures, the mismatched dates, the non-existent company names, all laid bare under the courtroom's fluorescent lights. Evan's attorney objected twice, but the judge overruled both times. The first witness was Mark Delaney. He walked confidently to the stand, work boots polished but still showing signs of wear. Under oath, he described what he'd seen in my basement that morning months ago. "It wasn't a new problem," he said, his voice even. "Those cracks had been patched before. Someone used tinted concrete to hide them, not fix them." He held up photos to demonstrate the same ones we'd printed together in my kitchen. The judge leaned forward slightly, studying them before nodding for him to continue. Next came Walter Green, the previous owner. He adjusted his glasses, his hands steady as he testified. "I told Mr. Bennett about the damage when I sold him the house," he said clearly. "I even showed him the insurance letter that denied renewal because of structural concerns." He turned his gaze toward Evan. "I assumed he planned to repair it before selling. I would never have agreed to that sale if I'd known his intention." Evan shifted in his seat, his composure beginning to crack. Mom whispered something to him, but he didn't respond. When it was Dad's turn to testify, the air in the courtroom grew still. He walked to the stand slowly, his hand trembling slightly as he was sworn in. "I found repair estimates in my son's office," he said, voice rough but steady. They were dated months before Nora bought the house. They listed roof replacement, foundation repair, over $70,000 worth of work. He paused, glancing at me briefly. I believed him when he said it had all been taken care of. I was wrong. Evan's attorney tried to shake his credibility, suggesting that Dad was confused about dates or details, but Arthur quickly countered with the original documents. When the judge examined them herself, her brow furrowed. The tension in the room deepened. Then came the inspector, his name printed on the falsified report. He took the stand with a firm step, his hands clasped in front of him. "That's not my signature," he said plainly when shown the document, "and I didn't inspect that property. I was on medical leave at the time." The attorney's attempt to question him faltered when the man produced his hospital discharge papers from that same week. A quiet murmur rippled through the courtroom before the judge called for silence. When it was time for Evan to testify, the room seemed to shrink. He tried to sound confident at first, describing the sale as a favor between siblings. But when Arthur presented the email exchange between him and Jeff Klein, the one where Evan had requested a clean report, his tone shifted. "That's not what it looks like," he insisted, but the words hung empty in the air. Arthur didn't raise his voice. He simply asked, "Then what does it look like?" Mr. Bennett Evan had no answer. By mid-afternoon, the evidence felt like its own living presence in the room, undeniable and complete. When closing arguments began, Evan's attorney tried to salvage what he could, arguing that mistakes were made, but not with intent. The judge listened quietly, then turned to Arthur. He spoke slowly, clearly, every word deliberate. "Your Honor, this case is not about neglect or misunderstanding. It's about trust. Trust exploited for profit. My client's home, her savings, her safety, all jeopardized by those she should have been able to rely on." He paused, then gestured toward the stack of files on the table. "The proof is here. The signatures, the permits, the correspondence. Facts, not accusations." When the judge finally spoke, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Having reviewed the testimony and documentation, she said, "This court finds clear evidence of deliberate misrepresentation and fraud." Her gaze fell on Evan. "As a licensed real estate agent, you violated both state law and ethical duty." She turned slightly toward me. "Judgment is awarded to the plaintiff in the amount of $200,000, including damages and restitution." A quiet gasp broke somewhere behind me. The judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, this court refers this matter to the district attorney for review and to the State Real Estate Commission for disciplinary action regarding Mr. Bennett's license." The gavel struck once, the sound echoing sharp and final. I didn't move at first. My heartbeat filled the space between every noise. Evan sat motionless, pale and silent. Mom gripped the edge of the table, her lips pressed together until they went white. Dad lowered his head, eyes closed. Arthur touched my arm gently. "It's over," he said. Outside, the afternoon sun felt brighter than I remembered. The courthouse steps were lined with people from our neighborhood, some I hadn't realized had followed the case. Paige met me halfway down the stairs, pulling me into a quick embrace. "You did it," she whispered. Arthur stood nearby, hands in his pockets, nodding with quiet pride. Dad joined us a moment later, his eyes wet but steady. "You came through this stronger than all of us," he said. As I looked back toward the courthouse doors, I saw Evan and Mom emerge with their attorney, both avoiding my eyes. For the first time in months, I didn't look away. The breeze caught the edge of my blazer, and I let it carry through light and unburdened. The fight that began with a dripping ceiling had ended here under an open sky. That evening, as I sat on my porch, the world felt still again. The noise, the fear, the doubt, all had quieted. Tomorrow would bring more paperwork, repairs, decisions, but for now there was only peace. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly, but it no longer sounded like a warning. It sounded like an ending and the beginning of something far better waiting beyond it. When the judgment came down, everything seemed to move both fast and slow at once. $200,000, a lien against Mom's condo, a full referral for criminal review. It was the kind of victory you could feel echo through your chest, not in celebration, but in release. I walked out of that courthouse with the sunlight warming my face, knowing there was finally space to breathe again. But in the days that followed, the quiet felt strange. For months, I'd lived in fight mode, every thought anchored in evidence, timelines, and testimony. Now, for the first time in nearly a year, I had nothing left to prove. The settlement check arrived a few weeks later, certified and deliberate, the paper heavier than it looked. I laid it on my kitchen counter beside the photographs of cracked walls and flooded floors, the silent proof of everything I'd endured. Arthur called to confirm that Evan's brokerage had terminated him immediately after the ruling. The State Real Estate Commission had already suspended his license pending full investigation. It should have felt like closure, but instead it just felt quiet. Justice doesn't fix what's broken inside you. It just stops the bleeding. I decided to sell the house rather than rebuild it. Every corner carried the memory of betrayal, every creak a reminder of what I'd lost. Mark helped list it properly this time, with every flaw disclosed in black and white. Even so, 2 offers came in within a week. "That's what honesty does," Mark said when he handed me the papers. "People trust you when you tell them the truth." It made me smile just faintly. Dad started coming by more often after that, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with nothing but quiet company. The day we signed the closing papers, he lingered at the doorway, his eyes tracing the water stains still faintly visible on the ceiling. "I should have known," he said softly. Your mother and Evan were always in their own world chasing shortcuts. I placed my hand on his arm. We all see things when we're ready, I said. He nodded, his jaw tight but his eyes kind. Our conversations had grown easier, lighter, even like two people relearning how to speak honestly after years of silence. Mom, on the other hand, stayed silent for weeks. Then one evening a voicemail appeared on my phone. Her voice was thin, tired. Nora, maybe we can move past all this. It's been so unpleasant for everyone. I listened once, then deleted it. There are some bridges you don't cross again until the ground beneath them feels steady, and ours wasn't ready. Arthur stopped by a few days later with the lien paperwork for Mom's condo. It's procedural, he said. You don't have to act on it immediately. He paused before adding, the district attorney's office is reviewing criminal charges now. Evan's former clients are coming forward. I nodded, a strange mix of sadness and relief stirring in my chest. I never wanted to destroy them, I admitted quietly. You didn't, Arthur said. You exposed the truth. It's not the same thing. After he left, I sat in the empty living room, the echo of his words hanging in the air. For months, I'd defined myself by the fight, every motion, every document, every sleepless night. Now, standing in the middle of that bare room, I realized I'd built something new out of the wreckage, self-respect, the kind you don't ask anyone else to validate. When the sale closed, I moved into a small rental apartment across town. It was quiet, clean, and nothing leaked when it rained. Paige brought over pizza on moving day, and we ate it sitting on unopened boxes, laughing about the last storm that had soaked my bedroom ceiling. Feels different this time, she said. Like the storms outside for once. I smiled. Exactly where it belongs. Weeks passed, and normal life began to return. I went back to work full-time, took long walks after dinner, even started volunteering with Dad at a local housing initiative called the Home Truth Project. We helped first-time buyers understand inspection reports and financing traps. It was small, local, and quietly powerful. Watching other people learn how to protect themselves felt like rewriting the story that had once broken me. One Saturday, Dad and I ran a workshop for young couples buying their first homes. Afterward, he lingered by the doorway watching people file out with checklists in hand. If we'd had something like this, he said, you'd never have gone through what you did. I smiled softly. Then maybe that's the point. He nodded, eyes distant but hopeful. Mom's name came up occasionally, usually from relatives who didn't know the full story. She's been keeping to herself, Aunt Carol mentioned one afternoon. I think she regrets how far it went. I didn't reply. Regret doesn't erase harm, it just confirms understanding, and understanding without change isn't healing, it's repetition. As autumn crept back around the same season when the ceiling first started dripping, I signed a contract on a new home. This one had been inspected 3 separate times by licensed professionals Arthur recommended. The reports were thorough and transparent, even listing minor issues like loose gutters and a leaky faucet. When the inspector looked up from his clipboard and said, "The foundation is rock solid," I almost laughed. It was the first time those words didn't sound like a lie. Moving in felt different this time. No champagne photos, no family fanfare, no forced smiles for a camera. Just me, a clean set of keys, and the steady confidence that I'd earned this home the right way. The rain came that evening, soft at first and then steady, but instead of dread, I felt calm. The gutters hummed quietly, doing exactly what they were meant to do. Later that night, as I unpacked in the new kitchen, my phone buzzed with a message from Dad. Heard from the DA's office today. They're moving forward with charges against Evan. Just wanted you to hear it from me first. I stared at the text for a long moment before replying. Thanks, Dad. Let's just keep focusing on what's ahead. It was the only thing left to do. That weekend, Paige hosted a small dinner at her place to celebrate the move. A few friends from work came by along with Mark and his wife. Someone made a toast, something about new beginnings and strong foundations. I raised my glass and smiled quietly. The words felt right. As I drove home that night, the city lights reflected off the damp pavement, stretching into ribbons of gold and silver. I thought about how much had changed since that first night I woke to water dripping on my grandmother's quilt. Back then, I'd felt powerless, small, and foolish for trusting the people who were supposed to protect me. Now I understood that trust isn't something you give freely. It's something people earn brick by brick through consistency and honesty. When I pulled into my driveway, the motion lights flicked on, washing the porch in warm light. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the rain easing into a soft mist. Inside, the house smelled faintly of paint and new wood. The sound of rain against the roof was gentle, almost comforting. I realized then that what I felt wasn't just relief, it was freedom. I locked the door behind me, set my phone on the counter, and leaned against the kitchen island. Outside, thunder rolled far away, no longer a warning, but a reminder of where I'd been and what I'd survived. The fight was over. Tomorrow, life would go on, quietly built, one honest day at a time. And this time, the ground beneath me was solid. 6 months later, the house finally felt like home. The paint had dried, the furniture was in place, and the air carried that faint scent of wood and soap that only comes with something well cared for. The first real storm rolled through one Saturday night, the kind that used to make me tense up at every rumble of thunder. This time I sat by the window with a cup of tea and watched the rain glide down the glass without a single drop sneaking in. The gutters held steady, the roof didn't groan, and for the first time in years, I felt safe while it rained. Dad called the next morning, his voice lighter than it had been in months. He'd been volunteering more hours at the housing initiative we started together, helping first-time buyers spot red flags in inspection reports. "You'd be proud of me," he said, laughing softly. "Yesterday, I talked a young couple out of buying a place with patched foundation cracks." I smiled, imagining him there, steady kind, and trying to make up for lost time. "Sounds like you're turning into quite the expert," I said. "Well," he replied, "I had a good teacher. That was the thing about healing. It didn't happen in grand moments. It showed up quietly in conversations like that, or in evenings spent cooking dinner with Paige, where laughter replaced the tension that used to fill my days. Arthur stopped by occasionally with updates. The state had permanently revoked Evan's real estate license, and the district attorney had opened an investigation into fraudulent transactions involving 2 other clients. "Justice takes its time," Arthur told me. "But it's moving." I nodded, grateful that the truth was continuing to unfold even without my push. I hadn't spoken to Mom since her last voicemail months earlier. Every now and then she'd send a short text, holidays, birthdays, but the words never carried weight. I'd learned that forgiveness didn't mean reopening the door. Sometimes it just meant setting down the anger and walking forward without it. Dad and I had built something sturdier in its place, an honest bond without blame or pretense. We met for breakfast every Sunday, the way some people go to church. It was our way of keeping faith with each other and with ourselves. At work, people started to notice the difference in me. I wasn't carrying that invisible heaviness anymore. My supervisor even joked that I smiled more during budget meetings, which was a small miracle in itself. In truth, the fight had stripped me down to my core and rebuilt my sense of worth piece by piece. I no longer apologized for asking questions or insisting on transparency. I'd learned that silence protects no one, not in families, not in business, not in life. One afternoon, an email arrived from a coworker named Diane. The subject line read, "Need your advice, house issue." Her message was nervous and rushed. Her brother-in-law, also a realtor, was pressuring her into buying a can't-miss deal before someone else swooped in. The details were too familiar, the urgency, the vague inspection, the emotional leverage. I took a deep breath and wrote back carefully. I gave her Arthur's contact information, a checklist from our initiative, and my own promise to review her paperwork before she signed anything. Trust is earned. I wrote even when it comes from family. Especially then. When I hit send, something settled in my chest. Maybe this was what all of it had led to. Not revenge, not even justice, but prevention. Making sure no one else had to learn the hard way that love and trust aren't the same thing. Paige stopped by later that evening with groceries and caught me smiling at my laptop. "You're helping someone again, aren't you?" she said. I nodded. "Just trying to pay forward what I've learned." She unpacked the food and laughed. "That's your kind of revenge, turning a mess into something useful." A few nights later, I hosted a small dinner for friends and neighbors. Dad brought a framed watercolor painting of my new home done by one of the volunteers from the initiative. Beneath it in small lettering were the words, "Built on Truth." When everyone raised their glasses, the moment felt simple and right. We toasted not just the house, but everything it took to get here, the nights of fear, the days of determination, and the long climb toward peace. As the evening wound down, I stood on the porch, watching rain clouds drift past the moon. The old fear was gone, replaced by a quiet strength I hadn't known before. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought in courtrooms or contracts, they're fought in silence against the people who should have protected you. But winning those battles teaches you who deserves a place in your life and who doesn't. When I finally turned off the lights and headed upstairs, the house creaked softly around me, alive and whole. I paused at the window one last time, listening to the steady rhythm of the rain. "Built on truth," I whispered, and for the first time I believed it. Before I go, take a moment to think about the foundations in your own life, the people, the choices, the quiet moments that hold you steady. And if this story spoke to you, share it with someone who needs reminding that it's never too late to rebuild on solid ground.